Here's Brody Brazil.
So if I showed you a photo of a Montreal Canadiens team winning a Stanley Cup, you probably wouldn't think much of it, right? I mean, this Montreal franchise, over the years, they've had a bunch of success. They've won a bunch of cups. So have the Toronto Maple Leafs. Canada in general has had plenty of experience with the Stanley Cup over time. But what if I also let you know that this was the last time, 92-93, that a Canadian team hoisted Lord Stanley? That's right, it's been more than 30 years since a Canadian team won the Cup. And by the way, I was north of the border this past weekend. I got to watch some playoff hockey, like literally hockey night in Canada, while I was in Canada. It's great to be surrounded by Canadians when you're watching playoff hockey. But I could also sense, especially watching the Vancouver-Edmonton series, how much it eats at them that they haven't won a cup. One of their teams, any one of their teams, hasn't won a cup in more than 30 years. And don't get me wrong, Canadians are great sports fans and great hockey fans especially. It's their sport, it's their game, and they'll watch it no matter what. Their fandom will exist no matter what. But I definitely think that this is eating at them, and they're starting to wonder, are they cursed? And more on their best chance. It's the Edmonton Oilers in just a second, but first, let's revisit how long ago 1993 actually was. For some of us, I'll say it doesn't feel like that long ago. But when you really let it sink in, I mean, Jurassic Park was number one at the box office back in 1993. What's a box office, some of you ask? Yeah, you're proving my point. It was a long time ago. Michael Jackson was the Super Bowl halftime show back in 1993. The PDF was born in 1993. Think about that for a second. And by the way, you were definitely downloading those PDFs on a 56K modem. You know, bing, bing. Yeah, that. You were doing that back in 1993. And the San Jose Sharks had just played their second ever season. 91-92 was their inaugural campaign. 92-93 was right before they even moved into SAP Center. That's right, we did not even know about the tank yet. The last time a Canadian team won the Stanley Cup. And we're not just talking about Montreal or obviously Toronto. It could have been Ottawa over the years, Winnipeg since they've come back, Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary. So it's not just like we're limiting it to two teams that can win it all. There's plenty of opportunity here. It just has not happened north of the border in so long. Since 92-93, six Canadian teams have made it to the Stanley Cup Finals. Obviously, none of them have won. And some years in the postseason, it turns around like, well, maybe one Canadian team is in it, or maybe two Canadian teams are in it. This year it was 4 out of 16. 25% of the teams, of the 16 teams going to the playoffs, were Canadian teams. Now, I'm also not one to sit here and say, you know what? The game needs to grow in America. I said before that it's eating at Canadian fans. There's the other half of this too. Sure, it helps build franchises and markets in the United States. It helps them grow. It helps them be a thing. And do I think that some of the best hockey teams and players are stateside? Of course. But at some point, you roll the dice enough times, it has to be a Canadian team. It has been good for teams like, well, Detroit or Los Angeles or Chicago when they've won the Cup, right? And have little runs and pushes here and there. Those have been good things for those markets stateside. But eventually you've got to get this thing back north of the border. 4 of the 16 teams in the playoffs were from Canada this year, Toronto and Winnipeg. Ooh, Toronto. Eliminated again in a Game 7 in round 1 by Boston. Winnipeg also eliminated in round 1. And then Edmonton just defeated Vancouver. That also went to 7 games in round 2. Man, Edmonton just hung on by the seat of their pants, facing elimination twice. And they had a 3-goal lead, 3-2 final score in Game 7. So here's how it looks. Here's how it lays out. We're not really talking much about the Florida Rangers series right now. Not a lot of the East stuff. We'll focus in on the West, because the Oilers are Canada's best chance right now. You'd have to think. I don't even know if people in Calgary could warm up to this. But if you got to pick one, and you're north of the border, whether you're in Winnipeg, somewhere in Saskatchewan, somewhere in British Columbia, somewhere in Ontario, you're probably thinking, well, I'll take my chances on the Canadian team and end this thing at 30-plus years. Dallas has had no easy task making it to the Western Final. They had to knock off last year's Stanley Cup champion, the Golden Knights. They had to knock off the Cup champion from 2 years ago in the Colorado Avalanche, a 7-game series and a 6-game series. And now here they are facing the very loaded Edmonton Oilers. I mean, the star power is pretty tremendous, but it just goes to show you what Edmonton is up against is not easy. The Oilers took care of the Kings and obviously then just now the Canucks, and here they are in a conference final. So is this Canada's best shot in quite some time? I think so. McDavid and Draisaitl and a core of their team that was largely built having 4 first overall picks in 5 years. Right, the latter half of the 2010s, the Edmonton Oilers were kings of the first overall pick. And even when they didn't pick first, there was like a 3rd pick in there. There was a 7th pick in there. They always had bad teams turning into very high draft picks. In fact, you'd have to think that the way that the new lottery is set up is largely because of the Edmonton Oilers, but they got good because of their picks. They're largely internally built via the draft. They just survived a Game 7. And I know Dallas has already been through that once this year against Vegas. But the point is they're coming off seeing the end of their season 60 minutes away. They took care of it on home ice. They took care of it on road ice. They survived a series. They're probably feeling better than ever right now. Maybe not health-wise, but mentally feeling good about their team. They're also a very streaky group, Edmonton is. You look at their points percentages by month. October, a 313 with a 2-5-1, I think, to start their season. It was not good. They played 500 hockey after that, 750 hockey in December. They were undefeated in January. Was that 11-0 in that month? 542, 733. But you can see peaks and valleys from a 500 team to a much better team than that to a perfect team, back down to about a 500 team. They ended April with a 500 record in that final month. So they have the ability to get streaky. Makes you wonder right now if they're getting streaky, if this is the perfect time to do it. For Edmonton, not their first time at the rodeo of the conference final. This is the second time in the last 3 years that they've reached this 3rd round of playoff hockey, but they are the first team in the NHL with 3 20-plus point players through 2 rounds. Or I should just say 20-point players. That's the threshold. There's more than 20 points for McDavid and Draisaitl. But Evan Bouchard just joined Connor and Leon getting that 20-point mark in Game 7 against Vancouver. So again, it's never happened before that you have a team like Edmonton that is so loaded points-wise, 3 20-point players after just the first 2 rounds. But Edmonton's got that right now. And so expectations are super high for the Oilers. They haven't won a Western Conference final game since 2006. That's right, 2 years ago when they were in it, they got swept. And they're also going up against a Dallas team, and Joe Pavelski's part of it. I'll talk more about the personal connection there in a second. But Pete DeBoer is another personal connection, former coach of the Sharks. This is his 5th conference final in the last 6 years, but with 3 different teams. It's amazing, right? There's some consistency to it. There's some reason to it. And that's why I think Dallas, this kind of feels like the Oilers Stanley Cup final. The Western final feels like their Cup final. And I'm not saying that if they get to the Cup final that they're guaranteed to win that round and survive. I'm really not. But I do feel like between Florida and the Rangers, whoever the Oilers would match up with, I think they'd be okay in the Cup final. The other 3 teams, by the way, and Edmonton only finished second in the Pacific Division behind Vancouver, so Vancouver's out. But the other 3 teams between Dallas, the Rangers, and the Panthers, those were all division winners of the regular season. And this is also kind of cool. Whoever ultimately wins the Cup this year is going to do it for the first time ever, in the case of Florida, or the first time in a very long time. Dallas hasn't won it since 99. The Rangers haven't won it since 94. And Edmonton hasn't won it since 1990. And so going back to the matchup thing, I said if the Oilers can get past Dallas here in the Western Final, I feel like it's their Cup to win because they might have the best players, and it's not just Draisaitl and McDavid and Hyman and RNH, and Evander Kane's been playing well. Their blue line is very star-studded and thick and capable. But the best players have to be the best players, and Edmonton might have the best players. If they reach their potential, if they do what they've been doing, I think it's Edmonton's cup to win, but they have to get past this Western final. And as much as I'd love to see it for Canada, this is how I'll conclude the video. I mean, I know what this means to Canadians. And even some of you out there who the Oilers are not your team, but you'll root for them the rest of the way because you want Canada to win the cup. I'm kind of the same way about Joe Pavelski. I watched him enter the NHL. I watched him develop as a Shark, become the captain of that franchise, watch him kind of make a difficult decision to go elsewhere, sustain in Dallas. Not only that, get better as he gets older. And I don't know how many more cracks Joe Pavelski is going to have at a Stanley Cup or even to be in a Western Conference final like this. So I know I made this whole video saying that I'm pulling for Canada. I realize they need it. But personally, I like Pete DeBoer, and Joe Pavelski needs it too. So I'm a little conflicted on how I should end this video, but other than saying, sorry, as a good Canadian would, sorry. I feel you. I understand this, but I have my own motivations here. You made it to the end of this video, which, by the way, I appreciate. Thumbs up on it down below. That'll greatly help me in this video and this channel. And by the way, if you've never seen me or any of this before, that's great. I'm glad you found me. Go down there and hit that subscribe button right now so I can definitely see you back here next time.